got excited when he sent me the scripture reading. I thought it was Ezra 7 and 10. But this should be a good lesson as well. The letter of Artaxerxes to Ezra in chapter 7, verse 11. This is a copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave Ezra the priest, the scribe, expert in the words of the commandments of the Lord and of his statutes to Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, a scribe of the law of the God of heaven, perfect peace, and so forth. I issue a decree that all those of the people of Israel and the priests and Levites in my realm who volunteered to go up to Jerusalem may go with you. It's the first time I've read so forth in a New King James Version, and so forth.
Thank you, Ed. We are in Ezra chapter 7. Ezra chapter 7. And as Ed read, there is a king making a decree, and his name is Artaxerxes. As we're diving in here, I know where a lot of minds are, but if you give me just a few minutes of your focus. As we think of King Artaxerxes, and as we read this decree here, it begs the question for me, what all did Artaxerxes know in order to make this decree? And first, as we work through, those of you who are taking notes, the outline, we're going to briefly go through the letter that Artaxerxes writes to Ezra. He gives it to Ezra, but of course Ezra, it's also a pass to get through all the way down to Jerusalem. And after examining the letter, we're going to look at Ezra 6 primarily, and we'll briefly talk about some other sources of Artaxerxes' knowledge to get to this point of giving this decree. And then we'll take a brief time out and talk about what others have learned as well, and you'll understand better when we get there. And then we'll talk about some practical lessons that we can learn at the end. So let's look into the letter. Let's dive in here. We're from verses 11 through 26. 11 through 26. And then as we look after, there's going to be a little bit after that we're going to need to understand as well where this letter, this decree is coming from. So the first two verses of the letter, which is verses 12 and 13, he gives a greeting and a reason for writing the letter, but we'll start in verse 11. Now this is the copy of the decree which King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra the priest, the scribe, learned in the words of the commandments of the Lord and his statutes to Israel. If you were here with us on Wednesday through the live stream, you'll have a better understanding of where that comes from. Then, verse 12, Artaxerxes, king of kings, debatable, to Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, perfect peace. And now I have issued a decree that any of the people of Israel and their priests and the Levites in my kingdom who are willing to go to Jerusalem may go with you. So the decree here is for those who wish to go back to Jerusalem. And this is really just a retelling of Cyrus's decree that was actually at the start of Ezra 1. And we see that same decree when Cyrus comes on the scene in the book of Daniel as well. And it was a decree that was actually pronounced some 150 years before Cyrus gives the decree, which could have been anywhere from 100 to 85 years before he was even born. So this is just a retelling of that decree. But I really want to focus here. First, he recognizes Ezra, who Ezra is, although there has really been very little interaction that we have seen at all between the two. But he seems to understand who Ezra is. And remember, as we talked about on Wednesday night, Ezra is of the line of Aaron. So he is part of the lineage to be high priest. Okay, but he is a scribe of the law of the God of heaven. And whether or not Artaxerxes saw God as the only God is unclear. But what he and many other kings that are sort of contemporary of him at least had God in somewhat of the right position, which would be the highest of all the gods. And so that's where we get this idea of the God of heaven. Maybe not exactly how we would think of the God of heaven, but Artaxerxes he's getting there. He's getting there. But he recognizes that Ezra is essentially working for the God of gods, the God of heaven. Then in verses 14 through 17, he tells him what he's to do with this going forth to Jerusalem. So verses 14 through 17. Forasmuch as you are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem, according to the law of your God, which is in your hand, and to bring the silver and gold which the king and his counselors have freely offered to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, with all the silver and gold which you find in the whole province of Babylon, along with the freewill offering of the people and of the priests, who offered willingly for the house of their God which is in Jerusalem. With this money, therefore, you shall diligently buy bulls, rams, and lambs, with their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and offer them on the altar of the house of your God, which is in Jerusalem. So he says, look, you are going for a reason that we have given you, which is to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem. What's going on there? So we're going to send you to make a report and send that back to us. But then you get silver and gold, which are free will offerings by the king and his counselors. And that's being offered to God. I want you to notice he's not offering it to Ezra. He's offering it to God. And here's whose dwelling is in Jerusalem. Okay, I'll give that to you. It's the temple. With all the silver and gold which you find in the whole province of Babylon, along with the free will offering of the people and of the priests. So they also get other gifts as they travel throughout Babylon. They're going to be given more silver and gold. And what they're supposed to do with this money is buy things to make offerings to God. Bulls, rams, lambs, grain offerings, and drink offerings. And of course, he could have just been informed as he's writing the decree, but it seems as though he understands a little bit of what God's will is for the sacrifices. Because he brings up things that are specifically mentioned, and these are emblems that were not necessarily in every culture's sacrifices and the different sacrifices they make to their gods. But he says, we want you to use this money to offer to your God. And then in verse 18 through 20, there's what he can do with the rest of the funds, the temple vessels that were stolen by Nebuchadnezzar during the sacking of Jerusalem, and what to do with the royal treasury. So let's read that, verses 18 through 20. Whatever seems good to you and to your brothers to do with the rest of the silver and gold, you may do according to the will of your God. Also the utensils which are given to you for the service of the house of your God, deliver in full before the God of Jerusalem. The rest of the needs for the house of your God, for which you may have occasion to provide, provide for it from the royal treasury. So this is a lot to make a decree from such a man. And when we get to the next point about where all this is coming from, it might make a little more sense to us. But note how much he's giving to him. So they can use the rest of the money that they gather for whatever they want. Then they're also giving the utensils and the vessels that were stolen back to them. And they can take whatever else they need from the royal treasury. All right, this is a large gift, one that, from what we know of Artaxerxes and kings like him, this is an extremely rare event to offer so much here. We only have extra biblically, we only have 3 other times where a king in this position has given this kind of gift. So this is a big gift. Okay, and then he's going to give a little bit extra of an emotional appeal here from verses 21 through 23. I, even I, King Artaxerxes, issue a decree to all the treasurers who are in the provinces beyond the river, that whatever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, may require of you, it shall be done diligently, even up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of oil, and salt as needed. Whatever is commanded by the God of heaven, let it be done with zeal for the house of the God of heaven, so that there will not be wrath against the kingdom of the king and his sons. So this is where I say there's this emotional appeal that everything that's to be done is to be done with diligence and with zeal. And there's even more given here. So not only everything that they're being given from the royal treasury and the free will offerings of the leaders of the country and the utensils that were stolen from them, then they can require a tax on top of that. And this is also an incredible amount, just an absurd amount that they can require as taxation as well. 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of oil, and then as much salt as they need, which was the commodity of the day, salt. And it's unclear exactly how much this is, but we know that it's still an absurd amount. And all of this is to be done because, partly, he believes that the God of heaven is real. Even if he doesn't completely understand everything about God, even if Ezra, or as we're going to discuss here in a moment, Nehemiah, has told him about God, he has enough information to know that God is not someone to be trifled with. And so he says, so that there will not be wrath against the kingdom of the king and his sons. Because he believes that something could happen. This isn't just lip service, right? Because he's risking offending his own gods. So there has to be some real understanding that God is at least better than his gods to risk this kind of praise and acknowledgement. And so he doesn't want God's wrath to be upon him. And then, on top of the tax that they're allowed to take from verse 22, verse 24 says they're not allowed to impose a tax on them. We also inform you that it is not allowed to impose tax, tribute, or toll on any of the priests, Levites, singers, doorkeepers, Nethinim, or servants of this house of God. So anyone in connection with the temple is not allowed to be taxed. So again, on top of everything, we're going positively overboard. And then verses 25 through 26, the last bit here of the decree. You, Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God, which is in your hand, appoint magistrates and judges that they may judge all the people who are in the province beyond the river, even all those who know the laws of your God, and you may teach anyone who is ignorant of them. Whoever will not observe the law of your God and the law of the king, let judgment be executed upon him strictly, whether for death, for banishment, confiscation of goods, or for imprisonment. So not only all of the financial gain that they have, but he gives Ezra the right to teach, judge, and execute the law. And so once again we see he seems to have some knowledge of the law of God to understand that it is important to allow it to be practiced. I don't know how much the ability of him to put it on the whole kingdom of Persia, I don't know what difficulties that would have caused him, but he does understand that in this region, the law of God needs to be taught and followed. And this isn't just a man blowing smoke. Because if you look at verse 27 and 28, there's more to this. So this is Ezra's words now. Blessed be the Lord, or Yahweh, the God of our fathers, who has put such a thing as this in the king's heart, to adorn the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, and has extended loving kindness to me before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty princes. Thus I was strengthened according to the hand of the Lord my God upon me, and I gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. So this is from the will of God. This is Artaxerxes fulfilling the will of God. And it's made known that this is by the will of God. So he's not just blowing smoke. He's doing this because this is what God wants. And he's doing what God has asked of him. So remember my question that started all this. What is Artaxerxes aware of in order to make such a wild decree, such a rarity of the time? Well, it would help to go back to Ezra chapter 6 first. And what we find is, and this is where things can get a little confusing, there's two, from what we can tell, two Artaxerxes, from earlier in Ezra and here to later in Ezra. And again, I can take you through a lot of the research some other time. But what we find is there is a previous Artaxerxes, or whether or not Darius and Artaxerxes are ruling at the same time. Again, it's kind of difficult to pinpoint. But there was a decree by Artaxerxes to stop working on the temple. And then Darius looks for the decree from Cyrus to say, should we really not be building the temple? I think there was a decree from Cyrus. So he finds the decree from Cyrus that says, not only are people supposed to be going back, they're supposed to be building the temple right now. So Darius makes a decree, and if you notice here that when he makes this decree, that it says that it is by that it is by Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. Okay, this is verse 14 of chapter 6. And the elders of the Jews were successful in building through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet, Zechariah the son of Iddo, and they finished building according to the command of the God of Israel and the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So this seems to be the second Artaxerxes that we were reading about here in chapter 7. So here it seems that Artaxerxes is aware of Darius's research into Cyrus and what Cyrus said and what Cyrus knew, which is another very interesting thing to research, is Cyrus and what Isaiah prophesied of Cyrus. So we have Darius's decree that he seems to know, and by extension Cyrus's decree, because Cyrus also was aware that there was a prophecy, and it seems that perhaps that was led by Daniel knowing Isaiah's prophecy. So he would have known these two decrees and the prophecy that led to all this. But what we're going to also see is Nehemiah, who is a faithful Jew, is Artaxerxes' wine taster. That he is his most trusted servant, his most trusted advisor. And so what he would have known through Nehemiah is also unclear, but Nehemiah is very important to him. And he knows what's important to Nehemiah. And so we can read through Nehemiah as well. And so it really should not be a surprise that this is the kind of decree that would come from a man in the position of Artaxerxes. And something else to note, when I mentioned earlier that there's a list of others, and this is by no means exhaustive, but his name gets added to a growing list of foreign leaders who understand that God is someone to be respected. We can go back as early as Genesis 14 with the king of Sodom, who is dealing with Abram at the time of Abram and Melchizedek when he saves Lot from Chedorlaomer and the other kings that stole him and all that went down there in Genesis chapter 14. The king Abimelech in Genesis 26, that he is also given a taste of respecting God as he and his people are struck with barrenness. When Joseph comes in Genesis 40 and reveals Pharaoh's dream to him and what it means, that Pharaoh learns how important God is by understanding Joseph and where Joseph gets his gifts from, and puts Joseph as second in command of the land. We see that the Philistines in 1 Samuel 6, that they understand that God is not someone to be trifled with. Hiram, king of Tyre, who we see in 2 Samuel 5 helping David gather materials for the temple, as well as 1 Kings 5 helping Solomon build the temple. So technically he is a foreign king, although I believe it says that his mother was of the tribe of Naphtali. But he is half Israelite. But he's a foreign king, king of Tyre, who helps Solomon build the temple. I know that he's not a king, but I took the term ruler or authority loosely for this one. But Naaman in 2 Kings 5, a commander of the armies of Aram or of Syria. Pharaoh Necho in 2 Chronicles 35. He's being led through the land of Israel and Judah. He says, at the hand of God, and he says, God is with me, and if you're gonna stay out of my way, everything will be fine, but if you're gonna get in my way, God's going to destroy you. And that's exactly what happens. God destroys the people for getting in Pharaoh Necho's way. And then, of course, probably the most notable of all the foreign kings, because so much emphasis is put on his repentance and transformation, somewhat literally transformation, Nebuchadnezzar over in Daniel chapter 4. And of course, Darius the Mede in Daniel chapter 6, which does seem to be different than Darius of Persia here in Ezra chapter 6. And then Cyrus, who we've already talked about from 2 Chronicles 36, and of course Ezra 1 and over in Daniel. And then the king named Ahasuerus throughout Esther also learns this importance of God and of God's people. And so there's this growing list of names of kings who have come to the realization that God is important and needs to be handled with care, even if they don't completely understand all the ins and outs of God and his expectations, understand that he demands respect. And all of these men either see him as the God, the only one, or see him as the God above all gods. Which, if you're going to believe that, that's at least the better place for him to be, if you're not going to leave him as the only God. That at least God over all the other gods is a better place to put him. So let's think about this. Why is this important for us to understand? And I think the first point really should be rather obvious, which is if others can recognize the greatness of God, then why couldn't Israel? This was something that Israel struggled with time and time again. God is showing them miracle after miracle, wonder after wonder, sign after sign, and yet they just can't put God on the pedestal he belongs. And if Israel can do it, and Paul tells us that the account of what Israel goes through for what we call the Old Testament, for 39 books, if that's for our benefit, then I should ask myself, and we should all ask ourselves the same question: what about us? Are we recognizing the greatness of God, or are we letting other things get in the way of understanding how great God is? And not just great, not Tony the Tiger great, but how truly magnificent God really is. And our second point is, if it was important for kings to do God's bidding, surely it should be important for you. If Artaxerxes is going to put the royal treasury, the free will offerings, limit taxation, allow God's law to prosper, if all of that is important to him as head over an entire empire, then surely you, in your small corner of life, should find it no trouble to do God's bidding and to understand the importance of doing God's bidding. And of course, the most important thing for you to do tonight, that is God's bidding and recognizing God's greatness, is becoming a child of his. That's what he asked for, and sadly, that whole list, that's what we don't really see out of that list of these foreign kings. You could debate Nebuchadnezzar, but out of the rest of them, we don't see them become a true child of his, either becoming part of the people of Israel, or later on in the New Testament, we don't see those leaders become Christians, which is such a shame. But you don't have to make their mistake. You can understand that God's greatness is leading you to do his bidding. And so he's asking you to hear, to believe, to repent, to confess, to be baptized, and to persevere. And if you're ready to do that tonight, now is the time. We're going to sing a song here, Bring Christ Your Broken Life, and he will fix it, I promise. He will fix it, and you will never regret your decision. So please, come and make your life right with him as we stand and as we sing. Bring Christ your broken life.